So this is the all-new 2021 Kia Sorento. This particular model is the highest trim level SX with a turbocharged 2.5-liter engine, good for 281 horsepower and 311 foot-pounds of torque. In many ways, Kia did an impressive job on bringing together a lot of different features for a very reasonable price. In fact, it is one of the very few compact SUV with a 3-row seat and a 7-seat configuration. So Kia is trying to make a difference here. There are so many SUVs. How do you make a dent in this very competitive market? Kia is betting big on this SUV after a lot of success with its larger brother, the Telluride. This Sorento goes after many competitive models like the Honda Pilot, even Toyota RAV4 and Highlander, but it does it in its own unique way. Gone is the previous model's V6 engine, replaced by a 2.5-liter turbo in this particular configuration, but you can also get the non-turbo 4-cylinder engine in the lower trim levels. The new Sorento is about the same size as its previous model, but it has a 35mm longer wheelbase, providing slightly cushier and a more comfortable ride. Packed with advanced features and a great styling and overall amazing packaging, the question is, could this car and SUV actually compete with so many models in the marketplace? So let's find out from my engineering perspective whether this Kia Sorento can compete with the best of the best. So as usual, as an automotive engineer, my reviews are quite different from others in the sense that I go into details about the body integrity, paint quality, and other aspects of the car that are a little hard to figure out by an average reviewer. So here I am, I'm going to see how this car and SUV compared to other models in its class. So I'm going to check for the body integrity first, followed by paint job, and then we'll get into the interior and do a quality check as well. Keep in mind that this Sorento, which is a Kia brand owned by Hyundai, is not made in Korea. It's actually built in its Georgia factory in the US. So it'll be interesting to see how the quality of the car compared to its siblings from Korea and other competitors. So let's get right into this and check for body integrity and the body quality. So I run my finger through as usual and to see first of all if the gap is consistent and whether or not panels are all lined up. So I look for a consistent gap and a minimal gap all the way through here. And what I would say about this Kia Sorento is, first of all, the consistency of this gap is excellent. It looks all good except for this part here. It gets a little bit wider. But this part of metal stamping is actually quite difficult to do because of the extreme curvature here. So I can see why it's not quite perfect here, because it does get a little bit wider here. But otherwise, the gap and tolerance look all good. It's a bit wider than what I would see, let's say, in the Toyota or Lexus, but comparable to Honda and other competitors. It's consistent all the way through here. Again, the gap is a little wider, maybe 0.5 millimeter wider than what I like to see, but it's consistent, and I can see that the panel seems to fit really well. Now, if I keep on carrying over here, the panels all look good here as well. The gap looks pretty good and consistent, and again, the width of the gap is a bit wider than what I'm used to seeing from a Japanese product, but I don't see any kind of a defects or problem with the gap. Now let's go through and check the panel with my usual ping-pong ball technique. So I use my special technique using a ping-pong ball to see if the panels are aligned properly and whether or not they're at the same height or same level. And this is one way to test for the integrity and the quality of the body panel. So if I run my ping-pong ball back and forth gently, then you can tell if one panel is higher than the rest. So I can tell right now that this panel is just ever slightly higher than this side, but nothing unusual. I would say it's within the tolerance of what I would expect in this segment. And I'll do the same thing here and one more over here. And actually it's pretty well made. I don't see any problem with the gaps or the consistency of the panel, and everything seems to be aligned well.
Now is the time to do the paint check.
Now let's take a look at the paint quality and see how it fares with other competitors. So if I walk slowly and look for the gloss and the reflection of the paint, again, I know the paint is a little bit wet right now, but it's very consistent. The gloss and the surface finish seems to be good. Do I say it's the best in the world? No, not quite, of course, but you can tell the reflection is good. There is a bit more orange peel than what I like in the paint, but overall the paint quality looks really good. Now let's take a look at the paint thickness to see if there's sufficient paint applied to this car to compete with others. So how this works is the paint thickness gauge like this will provide an actual thickness of the total paint applied to the car in microns. And on average, the paint thickness is usually from 100 to 180. Some are thicker, closer to 180, and some are thinner, closer to 120. And depending on the thickness that shows up in display, you can tell how quality of a paint it is. So let's see how Kia Sorento's paint job is. 132, 138, so that's slightly thicker than average. Usually Japanese or Asian cars are about 120 in thickness. 121, that's pretty well average. 110, so that's also about average. 119, so that's slightly thinner than the other panel. 111, so the door's a little bit thinner, but nothing out of the ordinary. And for some reason, this rear quarter is slightly thicker. 140, so this panel has a slightly thicker paint than this one, not much, about 25 micron difference. If there was more than 50 micron difference, then that means something was repaired on that particular panel. 108, so it's a little bit thinner on the rear hatch, which is not unusual. And 130, so it's pretty well consistent. It's ranging from about 110 to about 130 all the way around. So paint thickness is uniform and consistent. Some sections were slightly thinner, but nothing out of the ordinary. So the paint job is pretty average in terms of thickness, and the overall quality of the paint job is actually very good as well. Now, for those people who are following Kia and Hyundai carefully, you will notice that their products have done really well in the quality surveys recently, including the JD Power or even Consumer Report rating. They have done extremely well with a very low number of defects, right up there with some of the best from Japan. So I expect nothing less from this Kia Sorento. I believe the quality will be just as good as others and surpassing some of the European and domestic or American products. So let's see how long it takes for Kia to continue to climb up to the top in terms of the overall fit and finish and reliability. Now I'm inside the Kia Sorento, and it's time to check for quality, fit and finish, and the overall design of the interior. One of the ways to find out whether the interior components have been assembled properly is to use what I call a tennis ball check. Now this is actually not a tennis ball, this is a lacrosse ball, but same idea here. On the exterior I use a ping pong ball for checking the quality. In the inside I use something like this, and you can just tap gently here, and you can usually induce some form of rattle if any of the parts are not fitting correctly. But on this Kia Sorento, so you just gently tap, you don't need to tap very hard. It's pretty solid. In fact, it's a lot more solid than many other cars I've done this with. It's pretty solid. So what happens is that this is a good way to test whether over time some of the parts will come loose and develop into rattles and squeaks. But well, first of all, I didn't notice any rattles and squeaks when I was driving this car, but I can tell just by knocking this, it's a really solidly built car. So it's built in their US factory, but I think the quality is just as good as their Korean factory product, and so far I'm pretty impressed. I also look for design features here to see if things like the stitching here is well done, and the quality of the molded plastic. So usually a cheaper material shows up in this texture here, and they look fake, but in this particular case, the amount of the matte finish and the way that this pattern works is extremely well done. This is sometimes hard to get it done correctly, but on this particular one, all the materials look like it's well made and fit really well. So I'm not quite sure about this pattern here though, because it kind of looks like a fish scale or snake skin, and I'm not sure if everyone will like that. But in any case, this large infotainment system and also electronic system here all work really well. Now lots of technology features in this Kia. I'm not going to go through all of them, but all the standard safety features are included in this Kia, and like most Korean products, their infotainment system is really well designed. The infotainment system is responsive, it's quick. In most Korean products, they do a better job of this than in other North American products sometime. And I'm really glad that Kia kept most of the buttons here, although there's really no knobs to turn, but the temperature control is easy to manipulate and manage, and everything else is kind of like a semi-touch panel. You just kind of touch and move things around. There's no tactile feel as I push this button, so a bit difficult to figure out when you're driving the car, but nevertheless it's responsive and it's well functional, and it's very practical in some way. I just wish that there was more of the bigger rotary dials that makes it easier to move things around. They've done a really good job with the design though. In terms of the seats, it's very supportive. I really like having this side support, and a very nifty design here. This diamond pattern is something you only see in very expensive cars, but here in the Sorento you get it in this SX model for a very reasonable price. In terms of practical thing, this Sorento hits the mark, and it does a better job of providing practicality than most of its competition. Perhaps the only challenge is that if you want the turbocharged model, like in this SX, you don't end up with a 7-seater model, but a 6-seater, because the second row of seat is only 2 captain chairs as opposed to a 3-seater, and not quite sure why Kia configured it that way. So if you want the flagship turbocharged models, you will have to always end up with a 6-passenger version, at least here in the Canadian spec model.
Now let's take this Kia Sorento for a ride and drive.
So as I mentioned earlier, this Kia Sorento in the SX trim, which is the highest trim level, has a 2.5 liter turbo 4 with a pretty impressive 281 horsepower and 311 pounds of torque. So on paper, the engine appears to be really strong, and it has a pretty good torque and power. But in a real practical world, as I'm driving this for a while now, the engine is I'm not sure if I would call it world class yet. It's a very capable engine with lots of power, and acceleration is brisk, and plenty of torque to allow you to pass cars and so forth. But the refinement of the engine is probably not quite there yet. The challenge with this particular engine and the powertrain is that there are so many great and amazing cars and SUVs in this price range that when you compare this against the best of the best,
I'm not sure if the powertrain is its strength.
the engine has a bit of an unusual noise when you step on the gas. It's not a pleasant engine sound. They're trying to make it sound sporty, but it doesn't sound natural. And it takes a bit of a time for the turbo to kick in. So there is definitely a slight turbo lag, not all that noticeable, maybe in everyday driving, but if you're a type of driver who likes to step on the gas a bit in a spirited driving style, you will definitely notice that there's a bit of a turbo lag. I think when it comes to Turbo 4, the Europeans, in particular the Germans, do a really good job. So if you compare it to a BMW or Audi, 4-cylinder turbo engines, I would say those powertrains are still far superior to this one. So Kia has come a long way in terms of powertrain and technology and engine, transmission, suspension, all that. But I would say this particular engine can use a little bit more refinement. and requires a little bit more iteration to get it to the top of the line segment. This Sorento has a very precise and accurate steering, and what I mean by that is as I move the steering left and right, the car points in the direction very quickly, so it follows my hand gestures pretty accurately. And so I would say in comparison to some of the softer SUVs that I've driven in this segment, this Sorento has a slightly better handling, a bit more accurate and precise steering, but I would say overall it's still very light. The steering is overly light. There's not much on-center feel. On-center feel means as I move the steering left and right off the center, I should feel some resistance so that I can feel the road coming to my hand. But in the Sorento, there's not much on-center feel. It's very light, particularly at lower speed. But even as you pick up the speed, the steering feel is numb. I would say it's very numb. Now there is a sport mode I can put it in, so I just put in the sport mode now, and it improves slightly. So it gets a little bit heavier, but I would say no more than 3 to 4%. So there's not even a 5% difference in steering feel between the comfort mode and the sport mode. It does improve a little bit, and also in sport mode the transmission has a bit more aggressive shifting point and so forth. So once you put in sport mode, it does feel a little bit livelier, and the steering can feel a little bit better as well. But overall, I would say in comparison to its competitors, it is very similar to most of the other Japanese SUVs you find. I would say the steering feels better than the RAV4. The RAV4 has a very light steering and almost no feeling at all. So clearly it's definitely better than the RAV4. Although I would say the RAV4 Prime, which has a very sportier character, is definitely better than this one. What about in comparison to, well, let's say a Honda Pilot, which I think is a kind of benchmark in this segment. And I would say the Pilot has definitely an overall better feeling all around in terms of steering feel, in terms of ride, refinement. So it depends on which SUV you compare it to. Is a bit hard to say, because this Sorento kind of straddles two different segments. It's sort of the similar size as a RAV4 and other compact mid-side SUV, so it kind of competes with Honda CR-V as well. But because it's got a 3-row with a 7-passenger capacity, you can argue that it competes with other larger SUV like the Honda models and Honda Pilot, and even its own Kia Telluride model. The ride is okay, it's balanced, it's predictable, it's very comfortable. The engine noise, as I mentioned, it's a bit odd, and also the overall quietness inside the cabin, it's a little bit on the noisier side again when compared to Honda or Toyota products. So overall, I would say that it does perform a bit sportier than its general competitors, which is what Kia intended to do. But when it comes to a level of refinement and smoothness, it's not quite there yet. I think the most important marketing point for this model is that it is providing a 7-passenger capacity and tons of technology and features for a 5-passenger price markets, and that's really the key point here. And design wise is excellent inside and out, and it looks great. Overall it drives very good, and what can I say, it's probably in the right market, in the right segment with the right pricing, but I would not say that this is an SUV that is a benchmark in this market. Another interesting point to keep in mind is that in comparison to the larger sibling, the Telluride, again, this Sorento falls behind in terms of refinement and in terms of overall comfort and performance. So There's not a huge price difference between this and Telluride. So that's where the biggest challenge might be. I know not everyone wants to buy the big Telluride because it's very large, but that Telluride has a V6 engine, a really good V6 engine, a much more refined and quieter cabin, and I might even say that it has a slightly better overall feel. This one is sportier though. The Telluride is very, very soft and comfortable, but the Sorento definitely has a more precise steering and has a more accurate steering to go with it. So if you're trying to figure out and decide between this and the Telluride, it's going to depend a lot on the space you want and whether you value comfort more than performance, because this one is slightly sportier overall. My wish is that over time Kia will improve this SUV and refine its powertrain, suspension, noise level, what we call NVH, which stands for noise, vibration, and harshness. If they can improve that further, this Sorento can become one of the benchmarks. So my overall conclusion for this Kia Sorento is that it provides a lot of value for the money. It has tons of features, some really great advanced safety features, good overall performance, and quite an accurate and precise steering. It is a bit sportier than its competition. Is it more comfortable than the competitor's model? Maybe, perhaps not. It's not quite as refined as the best from Japan. But for the price point, it provides a really, really good set of features. And also, it's the only mid-size segment in this size that offers 6 or 7 passenger capacity. Most of the other SUV that offers 6 or 7 passenger is quite a bit bigger than this. So they are hitting a very sweet point with this Sorento. So I finish off with my usual 2 questions, which is 1, if I were to purchase this Kia Sorento in 3 years, would I be happy enough to keep it, or would I get tired of it and would I sell it? So I would say in 3 years, most likely I would keep it, because the Kia has proven to be very reliable over time, and this particular Sorento has lots of features for the money, and in terms of having an overall value, it's hard to beat. And I'm pretty sure it will continue to provide a good performance and overall fun to drive factor. So most likely I will keep something like this if it remains reliable. But having said that, there are so many competition in this marketplace. In 3 years time, other Japanese car companies and domestic manufacturers will continue to introduce new models, and I may be tempted to move over to those models if this Kia Sorento proved to be not reliable. So it's all hard to say, but I would say overall it's a great package, a great value. And the next question is, what would I give this car in terms of report card, ABC? I would give it a B+. Not quite A yet, but overall in terms of pricing, in terms of value, in terms of the performance, it's all around a very solid player, and it provides really good feature for the money. So I give it a B+. Where this car falls slightly behind others is in terms of refinement of the engine, in terms of the smoothness of the powertrain and the ride, and overall feeling is not quite there yet. So it's not quite an A level of a car yet, but it gets a solid B+. And I think overall it's a good investment. It's just a little difficult to figure this out in terms of comparing it to, let's say, a RAV4 or Highlander from Toyota or Honda Pilot, because those cars have proven reliability, and also they have a really good resale value. Traditionally speaking, even though Kia and Hyundai have done really well in terms of reliability, their resale value have not been as good. So if you want to keep this for 2 to 3 years and sell it, and you're hoping to get good money back, Kia and Hyundai brands might not be your best choice. They are getting better, but if you compare to Toyota RAV4 or Highlander, it's hard to beat, because those cars have such amazing resale value. So Kia, great job overall in terms of first year of production. This Sorento is solid, well built, and has a great amount of features. I look forward to Kia continuing to improve this model because it'll become more and more competitive, and the value is clearly there. So great job, Kia. I look forward to driving more of their product because Kia and Hyundai have become such a strong player in this marketplace, and they're going to continue to kick butt of other competitors who's been around for a long time. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching my channel. I look forward to providing more and more information as an automotive engineer. For now, I'm signing out.